And also, this is one of the few projects that it's positive, it's bipartisan, it's about it's about our nation. It's a great project to be involved with. So I would encourage everyone to check out the website, sign up for the updates, and to just talk about the Adams.
You are listening to Historyman, the platform for historians, curators, and authors to tell their stories of the American Revolution, walk in the footsteps of heroes, and proclaim freedom reigns. On today's episode, we have Jackie Cushman, the chair of the Adams Memorial Commission. So welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Jackie, the John Adams and the Adams family were some of the first families of the United States, and I understand that your commission is founded to recognize them. Tell me a little bit about what your commission does and what you hope to accomplish here.
Absolutely. So the Adams Memorial Commission is a congressional commission, which means it was created by Congress, and our mission is to build a memorial to John Adams, Abigail Adams, John Quincy, Louisa Catherine, and the family in Washington, D.C. And our commission is made up of 4 presidential appointees, of which I'm one. President Donald Trump appointed me on the way out of his first term. We have 3 other presidential appointees. We have 4 congressional appointees, and we're working on getting our Senate appointees confirmed.
So your commissioners are from a broad section of the country. You don't have them just from Boston, Massachusetts, for instance. You yourself you're from the South. You're a daughter of the South, so to speak, coming from Georgia and having your undergrad here at Presbyterian College here in South Carolina. Some of the others that I saw on the commission, you got some from Virginia, or one from Virginia, Utah, Massachusetts, and Michigan, to name a few. So it's not like they're situated in one particular part of the country.
There was an effort a couple of decades ago to your point, some people from Massachusetts, the Boston area, to get this done. It did not work. It was a foundation structure versus the commission structure. But when you think about the Adams family, they're such an interesting family. The more that I learn about them, the more that I read about them, the more interesting they are to me. They really aren't just a Massachusetts family. They're an American family. And to your point, they're really the first American family. If you think about John Adams, Abigail Adams, clearly were born under British rule, as was John Quincy Adams. And if you think about the lives that they lived and the sacrifices that they made to help this nation declare its independence, then they had to struggle with, how do we deal with foreign affairs? What is our constitutional structure? John Adams served as the first vice president and the second president. He and his son, John Quincy, both served as presidents, and they're the only 2 presidents of the first 7 that didn't own slaves. So they're just this extraordinary family that I think is really good for us in today's world to really look and think about, what did they go through? What does that mean to us? And how do we honor them in the lives that we lead today?
When you think about founding of nations and looking at from a geopolitical map, and you think about how nations start, those first few years were tough. And you think about, we didn't even, when we won the American Revolution, we didn't even have a constitution at that point. We were just fighting under a general idea of what we wanted. Talking about the amendments to the constitutions that they put in later, those were some of those founding ideas that everybody had coalesced under: the no taxation without representation. But it wasn't just the Revolutionary War. We have a significant part of our country tied to those patriots that fought in the American Revolutionary War. And then Britain came back later in 1812 and threatened us again, right? And the Adams were there at the beginning, and then they were there in 1812 to shore up our standing in the world by having to push back against the British once more.
Absolutely. And I love the way you talk about the founding of our nation and what went into it, because in retrospect, we're about to hit the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and in retrospect, it looks like it just happened. Oh, look, we're a country, we're here, it's all great. But if you look at it, we're so lucky. We have an extraordinary collection of the letters that Abigail and John sent to one another, in addition to other people. So you can find them at the Adams Papers. The Massachusetts Historical Society keeps them. But as part of this path to next year's 250th, the Adams Memorial Foundation actually has a project called Road to 250, Abigail and John Adams in their own words. And so what you'll see on social media, if you go and look, is they wrote so many letters. And so we're highlighting what they're saying to each other 250 years ago, right? So a little over a year before the Declaration of Independence was written and signed and voted for, which we can talk about that too as well. That's a fascinating process. It's really interesting. But John Adams talks about the debates and deliberations, how tedious they are, how long they go, how he hopes that they will be sure. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what was going to happen, but they did know that they couldn't live under Britain the way that they were being treated. And so they knew that something had to change. So to really slow down and to go back and look at what were they writing to one another, which lets you know their thoughts and what was happening, it makes it even more miraculous in my mind.
I think when we had several years ago, when we had a push to take down all these statues of the Revolutionary War heroes and other heroes of the United States, it seemed to me that it was, and they were calling it a kind of a revolution in some respects when they started doing the counterculture push. But I had to step back and look at it and look at what these founding fathers did. It really was a cerebral process that they went through. What exactly are we fighting? What are we upset about? Mm-hmm. What is this a idea that is situated just in Boston, or does this transcend all of the colonies? What are all what's their thinking? And so they came up with the associational documents, which is one of the things that are near and dear to my hearts. Every community got together and went, okay, this is what we think about taxation. We think it's slavery. When we don't have and there's irony in that in and of itself when they're thinking this, but at the same time they have slaves, right? So there is an irony there, but the philosophical viewpoint withstands the test of time. So when I look at what happened a few years ago when they're pushing down these statues and stuff, it just seems like a mob. And this was not a mob that started the American Revolution. In fact, these ideas grew over the course of 10, 15 years, starting in some of these small little communities in Virginia and Massachusetts and growing into the rest of the colonies. So kudos to y'all for recognizing that and trying to pull this together. How would people get a hold of you?
So we are very visible on social media. So we have two organizations. One is the Adams Memorial Commission, which is the governmental entity. And this is the way all memorial, I've learned so much in the past 2 years. How all memorials are done. You have a governmental body, which is technically a small quasi-agency. That actual group is really commissioners and no staff at this point. And then we have an Adams Memorial Foundation, which is a 501c3 that has been formed, approved by the IRS to raise private funds for this project, because it will be, we will have to raise private funds to get this done. And so you can find us very easily at theadamsmemorial.org. Just search for the Adams Memorial Foundation. We'll pop right up. But we're focused not on the foundation side, not just in building the memorial, but a large part of what we're doing is talking about and educating people and entering discussions about exactly what you said. What were the deliberations that went into the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, and what does that mean for us today? And how can we be more engaged and better citizens, understanding our background? So, for instance, I'll give you a couple examples that I found really interesting. So, John Adams, he was a lawyer by training. He was a circuit lawyer. He didn't have a lot of money like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, which bookended him, right? So you have Washington before him, you have Jefferson after him, and he could be a little direct with people. He was known to be pretty direct and very argumentative, but he's the one that nominated George Washington to be our commander-in-chief. That nomination was seconded by Samuel Adams, and then the Continental Congress voted on it, and he was voted in as our commander-in-chief. When the Congress decided to write the Declaration of Independence, he was on the Committee of Five along with Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, but he was the one that suggested Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence. When it came back to the floor of the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, he was the most articulate and forceful arguer in favor of declaring our independence. So I very, very much believe that without John Adams, without his voice, without his ability to argue in front of people very persuasively, we would not have been formed as we were. Now, could it have happened differently? Absolutely. But he was key in having George Washington nominated as commander-in-chief. He was key in having Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence, and he was key in getting the vote to swing, because it did not pass the first time. They had lengthy deliberations about, is this the time for us to declare independence? And eventually the Congress voted yes, but it was not until he talked very persuasively about why that should happen.
It's interesting the different personalities that it took to make this happen and how they all fell under the umbrella of liberty. It was like they all understood they were different and they came from different parts of the country, but they needed to see the same goal and start rowing in that same direction. It took somebody like Adams with his personality, right? He was not the soldierly bearing that maybe George Washington had, and he certainly wasn't the kind of free spirit that Thomas Jefferson was. And you needed somebody like John Adams to codify exactly what everybody was doing and corral people back under that umbrella of liberty. And I think that's probably one of the hallmarks of his day. He only had one. I mean, he only served one term in office as a president, right? But
you're correct.
And he brought his son along just about everywhere he went, and who became a statesman in his own right, and was there for his own presidency.
Absolutely. So, and they're an interesting family. I mean, you raised a couple of really interesting observations. One is that Adams had the personality and the training as a lawyer, right, to be able to hear different sides and to figure out how do you make progress, right? You have to make progress or nothing gets done. He also, he wrote the Massachusetts Constitution, which our Constitution is really built upon. And he thought long and hard about the separation of powers and the structure of the government and how it would have to. People always say it doesn't, work very fast, but it doesn't work very fast on purpose, because if it worked too fast, right, someone could have too much control. So it was done by design. This is not a flaw, right? This is how it's supposed to be done. And so he thought long and hard about that. And then John Quincy is such an interesting figure. He left, there's a book out by Randall Woods called John Quincy Adams. It's about a 760-page book if you're so interested. But, he began traveling with his father, as you mentioned, when he was 11, went to Europe, ended up serving in various foreign service positions, but was of his generation the most traveled and most worldly man in the United States. Which meant then when he began to serve as Secretary of State, he understood how other countries would think and how they would react. And he also, to me, the fascinating thing about John Quincy is he served as president. Like his father, he lost after one term, but he went back and served in the Congress, in the U.S. House of Representatives for 17 years before he died after, basically on the floor of the House. But he's the one that really argued against the gag rule. He argued, he always was trying to introduce different things to either abolish slavery or to, somehow, don't expand it into the other states. Or he was clearly anti-slavery. And I do believe that without his arguments, without his personality, his force of nature, we would not have been set up to withstand the Civil War.
Very good point. Very good insight on that. I know we here in the South, we don't hear that as much as we should. But sometimes, just from a freedom standpoint, and I think this transcends all nations, all walks of life, you have one person that finally just stands up, speaks the truth to the matter. It takes somebody like that and to change the world. And sometimes it is slow. It's somebody needs to step up. And certainly John Quincy Adams did that, as well as his dad. So we're very appreciative of that. So tell me a little bit about the memorial itself. Is this Is this a room, or is this a statue, or is this a plaza? What are we dealing with here?
So that's a great question. We are in the very early process of this of the memorial, the whole memorial process. So let me give you a little bit of background before I look forward. So we were formed a few years ago, but the way the law is written, we could not begin work until a majority of our commissioners were appointed. That happened a little over a year ago. So it's relatively recently. In government terms, it was yesterday. So we've gotten up and running. We're working on the senator appointments. We're now working on reauthorizing our commission because we expire at the end of this year, and also adding an additional site into the site selection process. So the National Park Service is the entity that kind of guides and watches the memorial process, because they have, obviously, the National Mall is within their purview. So there is a whole process. The first portion will be site selection. And again, the site that we want that we're interested in is in the current legislation. Then we'll go through design, and then we'll go through construction. But the working kind of thought is, you have the Washington Monument, which is this huge, right, obelisk. It's enormous, which is fabulous, right? Then you have the Jefferson Memorial, which is to the south of that. And that's this huge, Jeffersonian, much like Jefferson, the big personality, and it's beautiful and lovely. So the working theory is to have something much more New England-esque that would be much smaller, kind of in keeping with the personality of the Adams and also with Massachusetts, but thinking of something around a library and a garden that would be very reminiscent of where they're from. But again, we won't get to that part of the process until we've done the site selection. So we're kind of early on in this process. This is a 7 to 12 year project.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
In your vision, and you're speaking for the whole committee, I guess, or the whole commission at this point. Do you see it as I go and look at Lyndon Johnson's rock. Then you got Teddy Roosevelt. It's on an island out there. Mm-hmm. You got certainly you got Abraham Lincoln's memorial out there, and you say it's going to be smaller, but in terms of those particular monuments, each monument that I just mentioned and that you mentioned are all singular, one person. You're talking about a family here.
I know.
Including Abigail.
Which, right? Yes, we can talk about Abigail, who is the most fascinating woman. I've read a few books on her now, and she was way ahead of her time. She was not educated. She was self-educated. She read a lot. John thought of her as his equal. She served as his chief of staff when he was president. She was his closest advisor, and you can tell from their letters back and forth that she was really, in large part, a source of his ability to deal with the rest of the world, because he would write, I need you with me. He needed her with him. She was very valuable in keeping his temper down and helping him think through things. We would not have John Adams without Abigail. He would not be the same person. So it is more complex. So the monument is much more complex because it's not a single person, and nor is it even one couple. But it's the four of them plus some descendants, including Charles. And so Charles, the grandson of John, who was the ambassador to the court of St. James during the Civil War, is the one who convinced the British not to recognize the Confederacy during the Civil War. So imagine, that could have made an enormous difference. It could have changed history. I mean, who knows, right? We don't know. But they're an extraordinary family, so it will have to be an extraordinary monument. But a lot of what we want to do is a reflection of their written letters to one another. So to look at them as people that were very insightful, that were having challenges, that tried to figure things out. And to me, the best part about this project is we're always going through trials, right? Like, there's no time that's easy, right? Now is not an easy time. I'm not saying it is. Now is a hard time too. But I think there is such relief when you look back and saw what others before us went through, knowing that they were able to get through it and make our country better. I think that brings a lot of, just a huge sense of relief that we can get through this as well, and that our country too can become stronger.
That's very well put. Well, it's a beautiful story, and it's an American story. It's near and dear to all of our hearts. It helps in educating not just you and I. And you said as you've gotten into this, you've learned a lot. I certainly have learned a lot from this particular episode, and I thank you for that. But it's especially important for our young people to understand that and having those touchstones of freedom, because as we become even more and more of a melting pot, we have a tendency to forget those things and forget those touchstones, those memorials, those significant events that turned America into what it is today. So thank you for that. I think this is a fantastic project. What do you hope people will take from this project, once it's completed?
I think a couple of things. I think first is that our nation was created over a very long time. It did not happen, right, instantaneously on a day. And that also means that as we move forward, that we have to change as we move forward, but we also have to be patient, right? Nothing is done in a day. You make progress every day. And the second one is actually a reflection of what you just said, which I thought was really profound and really helpful, talking about American stories and how do you transfer that, right? So John Quincy, because he was a son of the British colony, he was born under British control. And then he lived through the revolution, and then he lived in Europe and in different countries. I think he especially was keenly aware of the importance of creating a national identity. And I think we need to remember that. And I need to be very clear about what does it mean to be American, right? It doesn't matter. And again, to your point about people coming in, we've always been a country of immigrants. I mean, we have people from everywhere that move here for opportunity, for a reason, because there's opportunity. But I think we need to be very clear about what does it mean to be an American and to transfer those values deliberately.
So this is a question I ask all my guests if I have time, and we've got a little bit of time here. What does liberty mean to you?
So for me, liberty is really the freedom to do, right, to make my own choices, right, to determine what I want to do. And I do think our founding fathers and mothers understood that, but also understood that to do that, you have to have the citizens have to have moral understanding, right? So my liberty can't encroach on your liberty. That's not the point of liberty. I can't take away any rights that you might have. But, when we talk about inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we're talking about gifts that were given to us from God. And so I think if you start with the understanding that God gives everyone these rights, they're not earned, they're there. And that also means that as you live your life, you get to make your own choices, but your choices can't infringe on someone else's God-given rights. And I think that's the challenge, which is why it's so important to have an understanding of what it means to be American, an understanding of how do we treat one another, right? With respect, I've always believed we can have differences of opinions. People can have their own opinions. As I tell my kids, people have opinions. Most of them are wrong, including mine, right? Like that's opinions. But, that doesn't mean you don't treat them respectfully. You can be respectful and disagree. So that's a very long answer to what my view of liberty is.
How can people get involved with this foundation, get involved with this commission?
They can go to theadamsmemorial.org. We have a sign up there. You can just sign up for our updates. We'll send out emails about our, the podcast and other things that we're doing. We also have a donations place as well. And spread the word. I mean, talk to your friends about the importance of the Adams. I think they're very often overlooked because, again, they're between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, these big towering figures that are just amazing. But we would not be here without the Adams family. They deserve to be recognized. And also, this is one of the few projects that it's positive, it's bipartisan, it's about our nation. It's a great project to be involved with. So I would encourage everyone to check out the website, sign up for the updates, and to just talk about the Adams. There are plenty of books about the Adams.
Thank you so much for coming on board with us. And this is an exciting project that is coming at a significant time, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
All right.